bust out the candy corn, light up those jack-o'-lanterns. It's the best time of the year. And what better way to celebrate the best time of year than to talk about the most influential films on this season, the Universal Monster movies. The Universal Monster movies are the absolute gold standard classic when it comes to horror films. Now, this is not an easy list to make because the Universal Monster movies are like a complete package. I love all of them. Even though, yes, I do have my favorites, I feel like you can't have some of them without the others. They all come together. It's like a big, exciting universe of films. It's sort of like, you know, something like the X-Men. Like, yeah, your favorite might be Wolverine, but you still want Cyclops and, you know, Jean Grey there. So I think of the Universal Monsters as sort of like just a giant complete package. In fact, I even consider my fourth favorite film of all time to be the Universal Monsters catalog, even though that's kind of a cheat answer because that's like tons and tons of films. And obviously some of those films I don't like anywhere near as much as my fifth favorite film of all time. So it's a bit rocky, but it was super hard to decide which one of these were actually my top 10 favorites, but I believe I've narrowed it down. Just to let you know, even as low as some of these might be, if they're on this top 10 list, I think these are some of the best Universal Monster movies. I love every movie on this list. So if I'm speaking badly about one or I rank one low, just keep that in mind that I still love all of these movies. So without any further ado, let's get started. I'd say my number 10 might shock some Universal Monster fans. I think most people would not rank this one this low. But my number 10 spot is going to be The Mummy with Boris Karloff, the original classic mummy film with Imhotep. It is one of the original classics, one of the most iconic Universal Monster films, but I do think it is a little lacking when compared to a lot of the other flagship films like The Invisible Man or Dracula. It's more or less a rehash of Dracula. The story is very similar. Even Edward Van Sloan is basically playing Van Helsing in it. But it does have a bit of its unique identity. I will say too, it doesn't quite have that spooky charm a lot of the Universal Monster movies have. One of the things I like most about the Universal Monster movies is the atmosphere. All that gothic atmosphere with all the abbeys and castles and graveyards and spooky woods and everything covered in cobwebs and ancient mad scientist laboratory machinery and just that old look, bats swarming everywhere, creepy place on a hilltop. You know, Dracula's castle in Dracula. That's Halloween. You look at any of those shots and it's just, this is Halloween. So I don't think The Mummy has any of that. It's just kind of, it takes place in like the present day at the time, and there's some of that, you know, Egyptian tomb kind of atmosphere, but not even that much of it. Honestly, most of it's just kind of regular, what was then modern looking scenery. There's really not a whole lot of that atmosphere that I love from the Universal Monster movies. Boris Karloff, it is nice to see him finally get to play a speaking role, because in his first couple Universal Monster films, he was just a mute killing monster that was just there to be scary and intimidating. But boy, does he have such a great voice, and seeing him play Imhotep, he is just super intimidating. He's such a great character for it. And you can just tell that, like, you know, Jack Pierce had such a fun time putting makeup on that guy. I don't know for sure if Jack Pierce did the makeup for The Mummy, but he did the Frankenstein monster and the Wolfman and all. And he, you know, Boris Karloff's face just, it's so perfect for making him look like a creepy ghoul. You know, no offense if someone were to take that as a compliment or an insult. I mean it as a compliment. He is perfect for, you know, spooky makeup, and he looks great as Imhotep. I think a lot of times when they do mummy merchandise, they're supposed to be doing Imhotep, but they do him in the style of the first scene you see him in and the last scene you see him in, where he's just fresh out of the sarcophagus, just coming to life or just dead, and, you know, he's still wrapped in there in bandages and he's just all rotted away. Whereas, you know, he cleans himself up as best he can as a rotten old mummy, but for most of the movie, he's wearing the fez and the white gown and everything. And we never really get that version of Imhotep. We always get, you know, action figures of him as the bandaged mummy, which is much more like Cadiz from the sequel movies. Like, he's always like that. We never see him as like a normal talking human dressed in clothes interacting with other people. He's just a pile of bandages slowly drudging towards people. So Imhotep is definitely a much better villain. He's a much smarter, more capable villain. He's actually intimidating. My number 9 spot is the Phantom of the Opera. It's a perfect starting point for the Universal Monster movies. Although I usually think of Dracula as the start of it because that was the first talkie one, and that's when they really established the brand. There's no denying that Phantom of the Opera is a rightful part of the Universal Monsters catalog. Some people say The Hunchback of Notre Dame deserves to be in there, but I don't really think of that as a monster movie. He's just, yes, the Phantom is also a disfigured man, but he's also like a murdering kind of villain, anti-hero, sympathetic killer almost. I mean, he is a bad guy, but like we see where he's coming from. He's a tragic character. But yeah, he's a killer. It's all about, murder and stuff, that movie. And it just much more has that, while they both have the Gothic architecture and all, the Phantom of the Opera takes place in like all these like dark, creepy tunnels under the opera house and all. It's much more of like a spooky Halloween theme, where I just think of The Hunchback of Notre Dame as a great movie, but not quite Universal Monsters, in my opinion. Lon Chaney was in both, and he did a great job. You can't even recognize him from one film to the other. And supposedly he did his own makeup, which is even more impressive. But yeah, I think Phantom is the clear horror standout of the two, I think. And I think this is the best film version of Phantom of the Opera, I'll say that. A lot of the ones that came later, they just feel a little lacking. The atmosphere isn't as good. Just that black and white, spooky atmosphere. The face of Lon Chaney, the physical performance of Lon Chaney. You get so much personality from his delivery, and he's in like 20 pounds of makeup. So it's just incredible. I think the silent factor of it just makes it eerier also. And I know there were color scenes. I said it was in black and white before. There were some colorized scenes, but it just all works really well. I think it's just a beautiful film to look at. It is gorgeous. It's one of the best looking silent films ever made, I think. There are a lot of different versions of the Phantom of the Opera. This specific movie, not talking about the other movies that were made later. I love the musical on Broadway and all, but we're talking the original, 20s version of the Phantom. There was like so many different cuts of it over the years, and it is possible that every time you see it, it's a little different, honestly. But it's still, every cut kind of creates that same spooky mood. Like, it's one of those great movies like Nosferatu or Cabinet of Dr. Caligari that, like, you don't even have to watch it. You just invite people over for a Halloween party and you just have it playing on the TV. Like, that's just perfect ambiance for the season. At number 8, I have The Old Dark House. It is not one of the most celebrated Universal Monster movies. It gets overlooked a little more, I think. It's not one that particularly has a monster character to get behind. The closest thing is the mute drunken butler Morgan, played by, again, Boris Karloff. This was, his first horror role right after Frankenstein. And he was pretty much typecast, but I'd be lying if I said he didn't do a great job with the role. He's definitely the star of the show, even though he's not really the main character. It's not so much about the characters, they're more or less just the setup for the movie. This is kind of the movie that started the whole, people wander into a spooky house during a storm and end up there all night as creepy, horrible happenings start to go on. And, the old spooky house, the whole genre really was started with The Old Dark House. There were some movies like it prior. There was The Haunted House, which, when it came out, most films were much shorter, so it's only like 8 minutes or 10 minutes long. But it's just more or less, a band of people end up in a house and then some spooky special effects, like funny, goofy, cartoony ghost effects start to happen because it's a haunted house. And this one's not really haunted. This is just, the spooky house where, like, danger is happening in this house, but there's not, like, monsters and stuff. So I think it's pretty darn good. It's great at setting that mood. Like, if it's a stormy night outside and the wind is just blowing, it's a cool autumn night, and you just sit on your couch or a chair or your bed with, a mug of hot cider or hot cocoa, and it's late at night and you just want to watch a nice, spooky, atmospheric movie, this really gets the job done. It's a lot of fun, this film. I do think there's the elderly woman later in the movie who's a bit of an overactor. I don't think she's as effective. She's a bit cheesy and hamming it up, but it kind of just adds to like the cliche you're looking for, you know, the kind of spooky, like put a flashlight under your face and tell a scary story kind of movie that you're looking for in something like The Old Dark House. William Castle remade it later on. He made his own version in the 60s, and it's hilarious. It's actually fantastic. He made it a comedy, but it's really not the same movie. It's really a completely different film, but I'd say check that one out too. But yes, number 8 for my Universal Monster ranking is the original Old Dark House. Number 7 is Dracula's Daughter. Definitely one of the most overlooked films of the Universal catalog. I think, Dracula had it a little rough with sequels. Frankenstein had a lot of good ones, but Dracula's were a little rough. We never got Bela Lugosi back to play Dracula. Even the one that appears in this movie, the corpse of Dracula, is not even him. It's like a wax model of him. But Countess Zaleska is a great character in her own right. She's a bit more complex than Dracula, whereas Dracula was just pure evil. Zaleska takes a much more reluctant human approach. She doesn't want to be a vampire, but she also can't fight what she is. And for when it came out, that was a bit more of a complicated, more sophisticated look at vampires. I definitely think if you're looking more for relatability and commentary, this is probably the Universal vampire movie for you. It's one of the better sequels because it doesn't try to redo what Dracula did already. It doesn't try to just, milk that film. Whereas the Mummy movies, yes, they weren't about Imhotep. The first one was about Cadiz, and that one's actually more like a comedy kind of. Everyone after that was just redoing the same Cadiz story over and over and over again. And there was just no creativity, and the series just got stale. And, this movie really tries new stuff, and I like that. I tip my hat to that, because they didn't have to do that. Dracula was already cemented as Bela Lugosi, raising the cape. That's what Dracula was. So for them to go ahead and make this totally different, kind of complex film for its time, I think it deserves to be applauded, and people need to watch more of it. It is a damn good movie. I really think Countess Zaleska deserves to be represented up there with all the other great Universal monsters. Her servant, for that matter, too. He's amazing. But she deserves to be up there, and she's never counted as one of the Universal monsters. And that's really a shame, because, she actually does a lot more than the Bride of Frankenstein does. Bride of Frankenstein just kind of hisses like a weirdo for one scene, and that's it. And, she gets so much love, but Countess Zaleska, she's a full-blown character. She's a complex character, and she doesn't get anything. So that's a shame. More people, go out there and watch Dracula's Daughter. Number 6 is Son of Frankenstein. Son of Frankenstein is the third, and I think the last, of the actual good Frankenstein films. I know some Universal buffs argue this is the best of the three. I don't think that is quite true, but I do think it's darn good. It might be a little disappointing for people who loved Bride of Frankenstein, because that is one of the most highly regarded Universal monster films. So it might be a bit of a bummer that they don't reference anything that happened in that film, and now Karloff is back to just being a silent brute who's not complex at all. The Frankenstein monster was getting more and more human with each film. In the first one, they explored that a little bit, and in the second one, they really, went with it. But now he's really just reduced to being just a grunting beast again. But I think the star of the show is not Frankenstein's monster this time. The monster is good. He still has the moment where he sees himself in the mirror and he's disgusted by what he sees and everything. But the star of the show is Igor. Igor, played by Bela Lugosi, is amazing. It's one of Bela Lugosi's best Universal Monsters performances. There's a lot of confusion over who Igor is. A lot of people assume Fritz in the first Universal Frankenstein movie, played by Dwight Fry, is Igor. They think, oh, he's the hunchback assistant of Dr. Frankenstein when they first make the monster. But no, he's actually not even a hunchback. He just has a broken neck. He was hanged and pronounced legally dead, but somehow he survived it, whether he's undead or just lucky. And he's still alive now. And since he's legally dead, they really can't do anything to him because he's not legally a citizen anymore. So he doesn't have to live by their laws. So he can live outside of the law. So that makes him for a pretty interesting villain, honestly. but Lugosi's performance, while, over the top and kind of hammy, is just amazing. He's such a good, just creepy, scummy ghoul in this film, and he's really the real villain for the rest of the Frankenstein series, honestly. It's definitely a very slick film. It looks really good. It stands the test of time. It's a beautiful film to look at. It's very well written. I think it's arguably better written than the first Frankenstein film and better paced, but I do think it goes on a little long. It could have been maybe like 10 minutes shorter, but it's still a great film. I definitely say check it out, and even then it's really not that long. No Universal Monster movie is that long. Alright, we're into the top 5 now. Time to get serious, guys. Number 5 is The Black Cat, starring Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff. They are both phenomenal in this movie. This movie really doesn't get a lot of recognition. It's not going to be most people's favorite Universal Monster movie, or even in their top 20 probably. If you want some of the best performances of Lugosi and Karloff, watch this movie. It's kind of interesting because Lugosi was always typecast as the villain. Dracula basically just guaranteed he would always be the villain in every movie he's in, especially horror films. But in here, he's actually the hero. He's kind of seen as like potentially a bad guy also, like it's two bad guys fighting each other, but he's clearly the lesser evil. He's clearly the good guy of the two of them. And Karloff is just hauntingly evil in this movie. There's a lot of great shots in this movie, like very like artistic, well done shots and creative transitions between scenes. Like there's a lot of clever filmmaking tricks going on in this movie, especially for how old it is. A lot of these had really never been done before. It's very experimental in that way. The only thing that's weird about this movie, other than the fact that it has absolutely nothing to do with the Edgar Allan Poe story that it's supposed to be based on, is there's some really weird writing choices. Like when Bela Lugosi first sees a black cat in Karloff's residence, it's like his reaction to it is like, whoa, no one's weirded out by that? That was pretty uncalled for. But aside from that, it's a great movie. I'd say the only real major flaw I have with the film is the very end, not the climax. The climax is amazing, but the very end of the film, I'm not going to spoil everything, but the two characters who are not Lugosi or Karloff, who are, on the train leaving at the end, it all kind of just comes down to like a one-off joke. Like the whole movie just kind of builds up to this one little stupid joke that isn't even funny. And it's also kind of strange because it's like what they just experienced and saw and lived through was freaking crazy and pretty terrifying. Like it seems kind of like inconsiderate for them to just make this joke at the end of the movie. So that's the only problem I have with it. But aside from that, I'd say this movie's definitely worth checking out. It's really, really damn good. All right, number 4, Creature from the Black Lagoon. Like The Mummy, I wouldn't say it has that universal atmosphere feel. It doesn't take place in castles or abbeys or little old English towns at night, with little pools of lantern light, but it takes place in the Amazon. But I just think this movie has so much charm to it that doesn't matter. It's kind of one that's not so much a Halloween season movie, but right before Halloween season, like the end of summer, you can watch Creature from the Black Lagoon, or you can watch it whenever the hell you want. But I think it's still just a great film, though. I mean, these movies were kind of a dime a dozen in the 50s. These, like, science gone wrong. Here's some creature mutated into a horrible abomination. But the thing about the Creature from the Black Lagoon is that it isn't science gone wrong. It's science we didn't know about. It's actually like a missing link that we had no idea existed, just in a highly evolved fish that is humanoid. And it kind of raises some questions too. I think it's one of the appeals of the Gillman is like, you can view him as just some poor primitive animal that, wrong place, wrong time, or you can view it as he's actually highly intelligent and we just don't understand him. We just, as humans, think we're superior, but he's actually like us, and maybe under the water there's the whole race of these things. The sequels would suggest that because it can't be the same Gillman in every movie. I will say the second movie I didn't like very much. I don't dislike any Universal Monster movie, but for a Universal Monster movie, that one ranks very low for me. I can't go into full details, I don't remember it very good, but I remember when I did see it years ago, I was just very underwhelmed by Revenge of the Creature. But yeah, there's kind of that whole mystique about the Gill Man. Is like, is he a highly evolved member of a race? Like, we wouldn't understand him, he wouldn't have the same language as us and stuff, so maybe he is. Maybe he actually is highly evolved, and he just saw it as his right to carry, Julia Adams away. And that being said, Julia Adams, so beautiful in this movie. Incredibly attractive. She definitely helps the film a lot. But the film is great all around. It is really like the ultimate 50s mutant creature movie. You got the creature carrying the girl around in his hands, in the climax of the movie. You have the build up, you slowly see the creature. You have, good special effects. A lot of people make fun of it, but it's pretty damn good for the time. It's still believable. I guess you could view it as just like, oh, it's a guy in a rubber suit, but I actually always just kind of see it as a Gill Man. I see it as an actual organic creature. I kind of let the special effect take over my mind. And just imagining how much work it must have been for those poor guys filming in that suit in the underwater scenes is just crazy. They definitely did a good job of that whole fear of like, you never know what's down in the water with you. Julia Adams' character is swimming around, and it's just watching her the whole time, and no one knows it's there. She has no idea there's this creepy monster right below her, like watching her every move until it touches her, and then you feel that thing, you don't know what it is, the bottom of the water touching you, and that's a real fear. I can see how that actually probably got under some people's skin when they first saw the film. It's definitely, again, like I said, it's not the atmosphere I'm looking for in Universal Monsters, but it is very atmospheric in its own right. It handles the Amazon jungle, treacherous, creepy depths of the jungle theme much better than I think The Mummy handles the whole ancient tomb kind of theme. Okay, we're into top 3 now. Number 3 is The Invisible Man, though it's kind of a tie because I love The Invisible Man with Claude Rains. It's a masterpiece, and it is the one that did it first, but I also love The Invisible Man Returns. I am partial to Vincent Price. He is my favorite actor of all time, and he does an amazing job playing the Invisible Man. But Claude Rains does a fantastic job too. I mean, goddamn that voice for both of them. They both have amazing voices, and they both just have such like a strong theatrical presence. So they definitely bring a lot of class to the role, both of them. But I think if I had to choose one, I might go with the Claude Rains one, just because I think James Whale's directing is just so solid. James Whale, I think, is without a doubt the best director they ever had for the Universal Monster films. He made some of, in my opinion, the best films they ever had, and he blends comedy with horror and sympathy and all these other themes together. I think there's just a lot more context, a lot more substance to James Whale's Universal Monster films than a lot of the other ones. Some of them, like The Wolfman, have a lot more substance than some of the others, like the Mummy sequels. But for the most part, I feel like the Universal ones that are not done by James Whale have a little less to say than James Whale's work. James Whale was a masterpiece director, and definitely the best thing to ever happen to the Universal Monsters, and that really shines through in the first Invisible Man. I think there's a lot of good comedy in there. Just the fact that everyone's so not weirded out by the fact that Griffin is invisible is just hilarious. The reactions are unrealistic as hell, but that's what makes them so funny. And the special effects in this movie are ridiculous for this time. Like, I don't know how they pulled off a lot of the shots in this film. It's very believable that he's invisible. The only flaw in the special effects, I would say, is when they sort of like, I don't know what they did back then, now it would be green screen or whatever, but they kind of cut out his face, his body as he's taking the bandages off. It's cool that there's nothing down there, but you also see there's no back to the bandage behind his head. So somehow it's like a mirror. It's blocking out the bandages behind him. So that's the only part of the special effect I think doesn't work as good. But as a whole, the special effects are insane when you think that this was made in the 30s. My only real problem with the movie is I don't think they needed to explain that the serum makes him act crazy and makes him do bad things, because I think it would have been a much stronger message if It was just telling you that, if any human being corrupted themselves with this power, they would do bad things eventually. Like, this would make them realize they can do bad things and completely destroy who they are and rip them away from the things that they love and care about and make them, evil. I think that would have been a lot more powerful than just saying, oh no, the serum, it messes with your mind and it makes you evil. So I think that knocks it down a little bit of a peg, but it's still a great movie. And so is The Invisible Man Returns. My favorite scene from The Invisible Man Returns that sticks out a lot is there's a point where Vincent Price, he's on the run, he's escaped everybody, and he finds this scarecrow, and he puts the scarecrow's clothes on. There's just something about the way it's shot, the scenery, the music, and just the way he's talking, the way he's acting. He sounds so tired and just like so sick of having to just run and like so tired of what he's gotten himself into and all. And it's like you just relate to him so much in that scene, and it's such a beautiful scene to look at. That's the one that always stands out in my mind when I think of that movie. That is an amazing scene. But yeah, both the Invisible Man movies, it's a bit of a cheat, but both of them are my number 3 favorites. Speaking of James Whale, my number 2 favorite is Bride of Frankenstein. I think a lot of people consider this to be the number 1 best thing in the Universal Monsters catalog, and it probably is the most sophisticated when it comes to writing and acting and shooting and everything. It might be the top tier Universal Monster movie, but it's not personally my number 1 favorite. But holy crap, this movie is a masterpiece. The story is just so relatable. You feel so bad for Karloff's monster. Like, the monster is just like, he's full-blown victim in this movie, and we really just want him to be accepted by society. We want things to go right for him. We want him to stay with the blind man, but nothing goes his way, and it just shows how cruel the world can be to people who are different. And it's just relatable because everyone feels like an outcast in some way. Everyone's, been left out for whatever reason. And I just think it's very, very relatable. And it just, it amps up that visual style. The atmosphere is amazing. The hokey acting from, Dr. Pretorius. He's like the most amazing character. He is what you want from a crazy mad scientist. He's a great villain. He's one of the greatest villains in the Universal Monsters catalog. He's funny, he's witty, he's such a scumbag, he's so great. I definitely think he's the star of the show, but the monster is also the star of the show. The only one who really isn't the star of the show is the bride of the monster that the movie's named after. But she's more of just like the climactic goal of the film. She's not really what the film's all about. If you go in wanting to see a lot of Elsa Lanchester dressed up in the crazy costume with the hair, you'll be disappointed. She's only in for about 2 minutes at the end of the film. There is some flaws if you look at it, like the conveniently placed lever that just blows up a lab that's there at the end of the movie. That's kind of silly, but it's more of what it stands for, what's actually happening that makes the scene great. If you look at it in a literal sense, a lot of these Universal Monster movies crumble, but it's still fantastic. And the other flaw I would say is, I don't know her name, but James Whale loves that one lady, that older lady who just shrieks and screams, and she is so freaking annoying. She's probably another one of the reasons why I might consider ranking Invisible Man Returns above The Invisible Man, because she's in The Invisible Man and she's in Bride of Frankenstein, and oh my god, her voice just makes you want to rip your brain out of your ear and throw it on the floor. She is so freaking annoying. But aside from that flawless movie, it's beautiful, it's sad, it's relatable, it's creepy, it's atmospheric. It's amazing. I love it. You have to see this movie. If you've never seen The Bride of Frankenstein, what the hell are you doing? Go watch it. And now for my number 1 favorite Universal horror film. Well, when I say one, I hate to disappoint, but I'm lying. These are my top 3. I just cannot choose between them. Dracula 1931, Frankenstein 1931, and The Wolfman 1941. There are elements to all 3 of these movies that I love so much, I really can't decide which of the 3 is my favorite. Dracula didn't grow on me right away. The first time I watched it, I actually found it a little slow and a little boring and disappointing, to be honest. But then as the year went on, I kind of kept like thinking back at it every now and then. And, you know, my opinion was growing a little more. I was like, I should watch it again. And then the next year, a year later, it was around Halloween time. I was like suddenly overwhelmed with this feeling of like, man, I need to watch Dracula. I really want to watch Dracula again. And I watched it and I loved it. And every time I've watched it, I've liked it more and more and more. And I just think like, yeah, it is simplistic. It's mostly dialogue because, you know, it's based on a stage show. But it is the Universal Monsters universe. It is Halloween. You just see Dracula's castle, whether it's the catacombs where his coffin and his wives are stored, or if it's that beautiful shot of the staircase with the windows and all the cobwebs and just the awesome look of it. There's just certain ways you can make things look in black and white in horror films you just cannot do in color. And Dracula's castle that scene is one of my favorite sets of all time. And that is definitely the highlight of the scene. I think when Renfield visits Dracula at the beginning, that is the highlight of the whole movie. But the movie is amazing regardless. It's a masterpiece. I love Dracula. I know it's not for everyone though. You know, last year, my friends and I get together every Friday and we watch movies. I recommended Frankenstein one week and everyone's like, oh, this is going to be old crap. This isn't going to be good. And everyone ate their words and ended up saying it was an amazing movie when it was done. A week or two later, I showed them Dracula. I actually didn't think they were going to like it because, you know, they don't like older movies a lot, talky movies and stuff. So I actually recommended Bride of Frankenstein or The Wolfman, but they said, let's watch Dracula. And we watched Dracula and every single person fell asleep at one point. Like at some point in the movie, everyone was asleep. And when it was done, everyone was just like, yeah, that was pretty much what I thought these movies were going to be. That was boring. So I killed a party showing Dracula, but I love it. It's not for everyone, but I think if you keep giving it a chance, you keep coming back to it and you accept it for what it is, Dracula is horror classic to a T. Frankenstein, I think I might say is technically the best of the three, and it might be my favorite, but it's fantastic. That one I liked immediately. As soon as I watched Frankenstein as an adult, I loved it. But it's also the only one I saw as a little kid. I actually remember renting it from the video store or the library when we were very little around Halloween one year and we watched it. But, you know, when I was a kid, I didn't really take in stuff very much. So I watched it. I knew the story from that point. I remembered, you know, the burning windmill and everything. But I didn't really like have a huge opinion on it until I watched it again when I was an adult and then was like, oh, this is fantastic. I love every second of this movie. I remember as a kid mostly seeing Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. That was the one I took in the most. But Frankenstein is a masterpiece. It is so well done. Again, James Whale, he just has a special touch. And scenery, just like the distorted windows in the laboratory and everything. Like, it's just such a beautiful film to look at. It's so cool. The shadows cast by everything. A lot of German expressionism, like, influence in this film. But it's classic. Every line in that movie is classic. You know half the lines in the movie before you've ever even seen it because they're just some of the most influential pop culture lines of all time. If you watch Frankenstein, you will at least be like, oh, that's where that comes from once. At least once. You'll probably say it every 5 seconds. As for The Wolfman, it's definitely a more complex movie than, you know, most of the other Universal movies that are not by James Whale, as I said. But it's not as complex as the James Whale one. But whatever little it does lack in complexity, it makes up for tenfold in atmosphere. The scenes in this movie are beautiful. One of the first images that pops into my mind when I hear Universal Monsters is the shots of the foggy woods you see all throughout this movie. It's one of the greatest horror sets of all time. And, you know, just visuals like that, the foggy, endless, creepy woods with all the gnarled trees and everything, and just an ocean of mist everywhere. It just reminds me of how much I miss that. You know, horror movies today, they basically all take place in, you know, suburbia or the city or something. We really never get these, you know, gothic, classic horror locations anymore, done in this stylized, exaggerated way. And it really just makes me miss that. I really feel like that's something lost that we need to bring back in horror. Like, yeah, we can have our suburban horror, we can have all of that, but let's have the gothic horror again, too. Like, why exclude that? But even then, that's not the only reason to love the Wolfman. Lon Chaney Jr.'s performance as Larry Talbot is so sympathetic and likable. He's such a cool, just fun, nice guy that, again, you're really rooting for him. I think that's something really good about the Universal Monster movies is most of these monsters are not monsters by choice. They're actually very relatable and likable characters. And we really feel for them as they go through these, misadventures, if you will. And yeah, the Wolfman, the score, the visuals, the makeup by Jack Pierce, just everything about it is so good. I think it's like undeniably one of the best, but I just feel like on atmosphere, it's perfect. Wolfman Woods, that's as good as it gets when it comes to horror atmosphere. I mean, clearly I love the Wolfman. I mean, just look at me here. I'm wearing the damn shirt right now. So I love the Wolfman. So it's really hard for me to choose between Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman. I know most people would say those are the three most cliche of the Universal Monster movies, as those three monsters have kind of become the face of horror over the years, the face of Halloween. Like, those are the three main ones everyone thinks of, like, in the groovy ghoulies and everything, that's who it was. So it's like, I think most people think of those as the three main Universal Monster movies, but I say they got that way for a reason. They are all masterpieces. And even though, like I said, I think Bride of Frankenstein is probably objectively a better film than the original Frankenstein, and it is close in how much I like it, the original Frankenstein is just, classic. It's just gold. It's just like horror gold. It's just the stuff legends are made of. And, so much of Halloween owes itself to the performance of Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff and Lon Chaney Jr. Like, these versions of these stories and characters and creatures are what are hanging on everybody's houses this time of year and everything. Like, it's just, they've had such a huge impact on pop culture. And I think there's just no denying that the Universal Monster movies were basically the first major film franchise to become popular. Because, there was series, there was movies that had sequels already. Not too many, actually, really. There were serials and stuff. But when it came to being a pop culture franchise, I really feel like the Universal Monsters are the original one, and they're just sheer love and joy, just so much passion went into making these movies, clearly, and some have more commentary than others, some are just fun schlock, but it's so lovable. I can't understand how anyone can not love the Universal Monsters, and for me, the Universal Monster movies are the greatest horror movie series of all time. So I hope you loved listening to me talk about the Universal Monster movies and gush about them and sing my praises to them. I plan to do a lot more horror movie videos this season. I can't promise I'm going to get all of them done, but in my mind right now, I feel like I have a few more I want to do, like several more, maybe about 4 more that I'd like to do. But realistically, I'm not going to, say automatically, yes, for sure I am going to get these done, because I probably won't. So I hope you enjoyed it. Stick around for more spooky content. Happy Halloween. Do all the liking and subscribing and the sharing and the bell stuff.